Hi, I'm your host, Jürgen Strauss from Innova.Buzz, and I'm really excited to welcome back to the Innova.Buzz podcast, all the way from Idaho in the USA, I think, Jason Van Orden, who provides creators and thought leaders with the strategic frameworks to build sustainable businesses and achieve a life of genuine freedom and connection. So, welcome back to the Innova.Buzz podcast, Jason. It's a real privilege to chat with you again today.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks, Jurgen. Glad to be here.
Now, last time we spoke, we talked about focus on building systems on not just for profit, but for purpose and connection. So it kind of linked into my theme of keeping those human relationships alive in the age of tech. And that's even more relevant today with all this AI explosion in across all kinds of areas. So I'm really looking forward to today's chat. Now, before we dive in, just a quick note for our listeners who might be here for the first time, and if you are, then you need to know that each episode's a candid conversation, a practical conversation with a remarkable guest like Jason, exploring how they create impact and how they build human connection in their work. Now, we unpack their knowledge. We also dig into their attitudes and values and how those translate into action. We'll start with the big picture, dig into stories, strategies, and then some actionable ideas that you as a listener can perhaps use right away. And at the end, we wrap up with our signature buzz round, three rapid fire questions that I ask every guest so we can compare notes between episodes. And I'd like to have you think of this as a seat at the table. So you and me and Jason, and we're all learning together because we're having this conversation. All the resources, of course, and the highlights will be in the show notes so you can revisit anything that sparks your curiosity later on. Now, Jason, I
Yeah.
noticed you've done a fair pivot now to embrace AI in all of the work you do and combine it with the frameworks that you've developed over your many years. Can you share with us how your vision for the business has evolved with what's happened in the AI world over the last couple of years and how that impacts what you're trying to create and the impact you're trying to make in the world?
Yeah, absolutely. So as a bit of background for those listening, for the last about 2 decades, I've been a marketing and business growth strategist, consultant, teacher, had several businesses in that area. And I especially like working with people who have expertise that they want to share with the world, so coaches and consultants. And as part of doing that, my business for the last several years has really been focused on helping coaches and consultants figure out how to best package and communicate their expertise in a way that it will attract and serve at scale the people that they are uniquely positioned to serve. And so I've developed all of these frameworks for things like their messaging or designing a must-have offer, how to set up a campaign or nurture sequence. All these communications things that coaches and consultants need to do in their marketing and sales. And so when AI came along, I mean, naturally I got curious, like many of us, and I started feeling like, wow, I think I can figure out something definitely interesting or unique that I can do here because I have a background as a software engineer as well as being an entrepreneur and marketer for many years. And as I started dabbling around with AI a few years ago, it suddenly dawned on me that one of the things that AI can do really well is to apply frameworks to information or data. So what I mean by that is, like, especially in business, right? There's all these great frameworks. I mean, a simple example would be something like a SWOT analysis, right? That sometimes people use to analyze their business. And so what dawned on me was like, oh, well, I've got all these frameworks that I've been designing, and I can now bring in AI as well to just make it that much easier for my clients to apply my frameworks to their business and teach them how to take the AI, bring in the context about their specific business, who they serve, what their expertise is, what their offers are, what their vision and values and goals are. Take my one of my frameworks for whatever the use cases they're working on and help them then create these assets for delivering their expertise. And so I decided, you know what, I really want to go all in on figuring out how to help coaches and consultants not just scale their impact and income, which I've done for a while, but now do it by leveraging this new technology of artificial intelligence. And the one other thing that dawned on me too, as I've been thinking about and exploring this the last few years, is that one thing that's very, very important when it comes to using AI is that the information, the knowledge, the data that you're giving it to work with needs to be really well organized and structured for it to give you the output that you want. So what I mean by that is, so many people have tried going to like ChatGPT and said, hey, write me an email to promote my, such and such. And it's kind of the prompt and pray approach. And then they
Yeah.
get something that's generic and robotic and not good, right? And so, one of the first things I teach my clients is, hey, the context you give it is really, really important. All that background info about who you're trying to reach and why and in what format and length, and different things like that. So I've been working on like, how do I help? You have all these amazing experts out there with body of work and intellectual property that they've developed over many years. And I talk to a lot of these coaches and consultants who say they feel like they're sitting on this gold mine of stuff that they've developed, and they often feel like they're not leveraging it as well as they could in terms of the content they're putting out there or how they're delivering it to serve their clients. And so I've really dedicated myself to figuring out, okay, well, how could I take an expert's body of work and break it down into its fundamental elements such that you could give that database to an AI and it would be able to immediately grab, like, if you're like, write this email, write this sequence, give me a LinkedIn post, and you give it all the information what you're trying to do, that it could go into that expert's knowledge base, into their intellectual property, grab the relevant stuff and put together something that's in their voice based on their expertise and their ideas. So this combination of frameworks and really well structured knowledge, intellectual property, just opens up all kinds of really powerful possibilities for communicating expertise and creating awesome assets for serving people and reaching them online.
Yeah, I love that. The I had to laugh at the prompt and pray approach.
Yeah,
It's the
we've all done it, right?
it, yeah. Well, the first thing I did, I did something funny because I actually did something a lot more advanced, I suppose, initially because I unknowingly to myself I put in a prompt with context and structure and framework. But what I
Oh,
did,
good.
we were having our poor cat, unfortunately no longer with us, but at the time was suffering very badly, and we had to
Mm,
clean it up every couple of weeks, and we'd give it a bath. And of course, as you can imagine, that's a bit of a traumatic experience both for the cat and the person doing the
right,
bathing.
right. Yeah.
And at that time was just when ChatGPT first became public in beta, and I thought I'm going to give this a prompt, and I said, write me a poem in the style of Eugen Roth. So this is a German satirical poet from the 19th century that I'm a
Yeah.
big fan of. Write me a poem in the style of him about me bathing the cat, and I told it this is what happened. And unbeknownst to me, of course, I'd given context, I'd given
Hmm.
the structure, which is the style of the poet, and I was just
Right.
blown away by what it gave because it was really in that style and very humorous. But yeah, I like the prompt and pray because I hear so many people say, well, I asked it to write me a blog post and it just came back with rubbish. And I said, well,
Right.
did you kind of put it into context?
Hmm.
I guess that does prompt the question, and that's what's the most critical shift that you see creators like those coaches and course creators and the people you're serving that they need to be making, and the core principle they need to understand to adopt the AI tools inside of their business?
Yeah, I think one of the most fundamental things to realize, and one of the first things I'll teach my clients is that it's important to think of AI or learn how to use AI as a thinking partner, as a creative partner. And the reason why I say that is I think it opens up people to a little more of this idea of an exchange and it's something that's enhancing your thinking as opposed to what some people are worried about, that it's just going to replace your thinking or erase your uniqueness, right? And the other thing that this does is that, if you're going, the analogy I like to use, if when a lot of people have seen the Marvel movies, right? You've got Iron Man, it's Tony Stark in his lab, and he's working with his AI, Jarvis. And so, he's designing stuff and talking to his AI, to pull up stuff and give him feedback and research and pull something in, or find something else they'd worked on to bring it to, and that's the kind of experience that's possible, as long as it has access to all that information about you that it needs to pull from, to then combine it with whatever other research that you might need to apply to what you're trying to create. So that's one of the fundamental things, is think of it as a thinking partner, that you're going to have these exchanges with, and that something as simple as writing an email isn't just a one prompt input output, but again, give it more context. It gives you something, back. And like, here's a quick example. I had a client who she saw this post on LinkedIn that was in kind of this frequently asked questions format that was creative, and she's like, I want to make something like that. And so she just kind of put this one prompt in, like, hey, I like this post, write one like this for me. And it didn't quite give her what she was looking for. And so I said, okay, well, let's try breaking this down a little bit. First of all, let's tell it what you like about that post. And so she told it what she liked about that particular post. And I said, your first request could be something like, why does this work? Like, break this down into a template of what this person has done. So I was like, oh, okay. So it analyzed it and said, okay, here's the format of what he's doing. Here's how it starts and why that pulls people in. Here's how the call to action works. So now she had a template analysis. So then she could say, okay, I would like to write a post like this, and I specifically would like to focus on these areas of my expertise. So can you outline for me some of the questions we might put into my post? And so it went and looked, and it's like, okay, here's 10 questions we could include in yours. And she looked over those. She's like, okay, let's get rid of those two, and let's use these other ones right here. And then she's able to say, okay, now write me a post in that style using this template. And so by that point, like, she had a few exchanges, and it was a lot clearer to the AI what she was going for, and it was able to, and again, it's like using a framework. It had created a framework of, here's this post and how it worked and why, and then it was able to apply her knowledge to that framework to come with an output that is actually valuable and useful, in the end. And then the real kicker is when you're able to tell it how to write in your style, which is something that you can do if you break down your voice into the components and give that stuff to the AI. So yeah, it opens up a lot of interesting possibilities. So use it as a thinking partner, a creative partner.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things I think I learnt very early on was the value was really in having that conversation and going through those iterations. So the very first
Yeah.
thing I kind of did was, okay, I want to set up this landing page, and I want copy for the landing page. And I gave it the context and the business and the ideal customer, and what the offers were, and so on. And then what came back, I said, no, I don't like this, and I wouldn't say that in that way. And then it went backwards and forwards, and I'm sure we would have done about 50 or more iterations until I said, that's something that is really good, and probably a lot better than I could have put together over the course of many weeks and revisiting it and editing. So I think that's a really important thing, is to have that conversation. And you touched on something else there that is really important, and that's the thinking partner. Because one of the things I sometimes think about when I almost go to the artificial intelligence, one of the tools. I mean, I've got a system that selects the best one depending on what I ask. I often go there in place of the Google search these days.
Mhm.
And then I find myself wondering afterwards, am I diminishing my critical thinking ability because
Mm. Yeah.
I'm sort of outsourcing some of my thinking? But
Hmm.
one of the process, or the fundamentals of the process you described, I think, is that you're actually enhancing your critical thinking because you're forcing yourself, or the AI is sort of forcing you in a way to structure the information you give
Mhm.
much more clearly, to ask the questions much more clearly. And then,
Yeah,
of course,
right.
if you're diligent about it, then you look at the output and you say, no, that's
Mhm.
not quite what I want, and have that back and forth.
Mhm. Yeah, there's a client that I created a custom AI for recently, and the thing that she wanted to do was finish this book that she'd been working on for a long time, and it was supposed to draw from several years of many years of her career from all these different disciplines, and so it was proving to be a challenge to finish this book, and so um, at first she was a little bit resistant, but I got her to try out an AI that I gave, her body of work or a lot of the materials around this book, trained it on her voice and taught her a bit about how to use it as this thinking partner. And one of the things that she, when I checked in and be like, hey, how's it working for you? She used this analogy. She said, yeah, it's a lot like if I'm looking at a starry sky and all the stars are all my different ideas and thoughts and things that I have to work with, and sometimes I just look at that sky and I'm just kind of a little bit like dazzled and like, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
what, there's so much to look at, what am I going to, but she said, with this AI and learning how to work with it, it's kind of like saying, okay, let's draw a few constellations here. I want a constellation that looks like a horse or something, and it starts drawing some constellations, and eventually like, ooh, that's the one. That's the one I. But because it's all based on her expertise and her thinking, right? It's not just replacing it, but it's helping her to make connections or try different iterations or permutations much faster to arrive at something that would have either taken longer to get at, or she might not have had the time or cognitive energy to get to that point without being able to accelerate it or reduce that effort with AI. And so that's another thing. This thinking partner thing is, it's like you're giving, yes, you are giving some of the cognitive energy, some of that effort to the AI, but that just opens up for you to use your energy in the places where it really, the stuff that you're really the best at, the kind of thinking and creativity that is really your unique genius. And so, in something like writing a piece of content, there's so many phases you go through, everything from like, okay, coming up with the idea and doing research and collecting stuff, and then, maybe creating an outline and then drafting it and then editing it. And then, you have your final version and now you got to promote it. And at each one of these stages, the AI can help with aspects of that. And it still can be your ideas without even the AI writing the final post for you per se. It could still help with a lot of these other steps and save you time and energy, so that when you are really putting pen to paper, so to speak, that you have more of that focus and energy to really put into it. And so that's how I think about this, that thinking relationship with AI.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, it comes back to being really clear about the communication, having the right frameworks in place, and then looking for those connections. I'm always amazed at how good it is at connecting disparate thoughts. And one of my favourite applications right at the moment is, and I can't even remember the name of it, I use it every day. It's a voice recorder that transcribes, but
Mhm.
it then has some templates in there to give for example, a summary of that or give a
Mm.
detailed transcript of what I've said. But the beauty of it is I can talk into that and just sort of go 1,000 miles an hour from here
Yeah,
to
yeah, yeah.
here, and totally random thoughts that, totally scatterbrained. And if I would have written them down on a bit of paper, it would have been just that, a whole lot of scatterbrained
Mhm.
thoughts. It will identify those connections and common points.
Yeah.
And if I say, give me a summary, or give me a memo based on, or a journal entry, for example, based on what I've just recorded, and that will kind of open up my eyes to, wow, I never realized that this idea and that idea, there was actually a connection there. And in that space of connection, there's a new idea sparked, or
Yeah.
a step forward even more
Mhm.
importantly, a step forward. I can take this action and start to bring those things together, and something will happen.
Yeah, that's such a great use of AI. I've found the same thing. I mean, I love to go on a walk and then just voice dictate stuff into ChatGPT. And one of my, we've talked about context and being specific to get the output you want, but sometimes I think it's perfect to kind of zoom out and be more broad. And so I love just dumping ideas into it and then asking it something really simple like, what do you take from this? What do you notice? Just something like
Yeah,
general at first just to see, because sometimes it'll go, oh, but, and it'll come back with something. I'm like, oh, that was totally unexpected. You're right. Like that theme is in there and I hadn't really thought about it. Or I'll do that with an email that I need to respond to, or say there's somebody I want to follow up for sales or business development. And so I'll put their email in there and like, what do you take? What can you surmise about this person and what their desires or needs are? And it's so good at reading between the lines and saying, oh, well, I think this person probably, and just like laying out stuff that, yeah, he just might not have noticed or had the time to really pick apart. So it's brilliant at those things.
yeah. All right. With an example like that, and making those connections, have you had an experience where it's actually brought a deeper connection for you, something that opened up a possibility, or maybe even opened up I'd never thought that I have that superpower, or I'd never thought that I could do that moment.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. One of my favorite ways to use AI, I mean, there's so many, but one that I like is, how many times have we read a book and we loved it, and there's so many great principles, and you're like, oh, I can't wait to just apply this to my life or my business, but it's hard to hold all those details, and
Yeah.
maybe by the time it would be useful, you've forgotten a lot of them, or and so I was driving in my car to go to it's actually a business dinner meetup thing, and it was going to be an hour drive. So I thought, oh, I'll use this opportunity to do some thinking out loud with AI. And so I used the voice thing so I could focus on driving too. And was in the middle of reading a book by Dan Sullivan, and I'm forgetting his co-author, so forgive me. But anyway, the book was like 10x is easier than 2x. It's all about how to 10x your business and how it's just as easy to go shoot for 10x as it is to try to go for 2x. And there's all these principles about how to shift your thinking and your identity and weed things out and see what to focus on. And so I said, hey, outline the key principles of this book. And so there it was. It's like, okay, great. And so I said, well, here's this. I would really like my business to be attached more to AI, and I'm trying to figure out exactly what the offering should be and where the opportunity is given my background and strengths and history as an entrepreneur. So please just start asking me one question at a time, and let's figure out how to apply these principles to my business. And so it just started asking me, starting with questions about the vision. And so that led me to realizing, okay, I think I want to do like a productized service where I can create some immensely valuable thing, at scale dependably. And that's where the custom AI idea came from. And it was in that conversation too that out came the idea that it's like, I've already got all these frameworks, and those are perfect. That's intellectual property that I have, and if I combine that with AI, that creates something truly unique, and also just amplifies all the work that I have been doing. So it wasn't like this total left turn pivot or something. It was like, oh no, actually here's this very natural way to steer your current business, because that was my concern, and that was one thing I told it. I said, I'm worried about it's like having one foot on the dock and one foot on a boat where you're trying to go in a new direction and you're like still trying to stabilize, right? And like, I'm not quite sure how to shift this way without like blowing everything up and not, meeting today's cash flow needs while also moving in a new direction. And it was that conversation that by the end of it, like I had spelled out this service that I wanted to create, what my first steps were going to be, some research that I needed to do, how to start looking for my first clients within my network and things like that. And so, yeah, that's one example of where it just really opened up my thinking and pointed me in a new direction. And a lot of ways it was like talking to myself too. So it was like having a
Yeah.
conversation with myself
Yeah.
and this book, So it was like, if I were sitting in the car next to me and then Dan Sullivan and his co-author in the back, and so that was just, it was awesome what was able to come
Yeah.
out of that
Yeah. Is that
conversation.
Benjamin Hardy, I think.
Yes,
Um,
yes, thank you. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah, that's a great example. And I think one of the things you said there is something that I haven't seen a lot of people do this. And I think there's huge value to that is telling the AI, here's what I want to do. Ask me any questions you need to gather
Yes.
information. That is so powerful. And I've done that where it's gotten to the point where I say, stop asking me questions. I think I've got enough.
I think
it's,
you got enough.
it's,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah. But it really is powerful because it kind of it it's using some framework somewhere. I don't know where it gets the framework from, but if you set the context right,
Mhm.
like for example, help me develop my business strategy and ask any questions you need. If you do something as simple as that, it'll start off with what's your business vision, who's your ideal customer, um, what are the products, and what problems do those products or services solve? It'll ask those kind of questions, which are the key questions you should be asking
Mhm.
business if in business
Right.
of yourself. And it means it forces you to articulate that in a way that makes some sort of sense. And even if it doesn't make sense, it'll continue to ask those questions and do that connecting the dots thing we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
I think that is so powerful. One of the things I'm curious about, and I'm still struggling with this and trying to work out how to overcome this. Uh, if, say, you go to one of the AIs, and it doesn't matter which one it is, all the ones I've tried do this. Say, hey, I've got an idea for my business, and here's the idea, and it'll come back and say something like, "That's a fantastic idea," and
Right.
then it'll kind of regurgitate some information, and it might ask questions, or depending on what you've said in your prompt. But I've never had it come back and say, that idea sucks because X, Y,
Mm.
Z. Here's the shortcomings. And I've yet to really work out a way to find that balance of challenge. What I do at the moment is once it's scoped out to some degree, I'll then go back to the AI and say, okay, now you hate this idea. You think it's the
Yeah.
worst idea in the world. And I want you to tell me why it's the worst idea in the world, where its shortcomings are, what could go wrong. And then I want you to tell me how I might be able to overcome those shortcomings, how I might be able to mitigate the things that could go wrong. That
Mhm.
seems to work okay, but I'd
Mhm.
really like it to make a judgment early on.
Right. Yeah, it's a really important issue, and yeah, there was one update to ChatGPT where it just got so over the top complimentary. People were like, "What is going on here?" And they had to immediately roll it back because they're like, "Oh no." And yeah, I'm sure you know this, but for those listening, yeah, the reason why we run into this is because all of the chatbot providers want it to be a pleasant experience, so you keep coming back to use their product, and so they naturally tell it to be very agreeable. So if you've got mission critical stuff you're trying to do, that can be like, yeah, it can be really bad because it could lead you down a path that's just not going to work well. And so the first thing is just to be aware of it. So hopefully we're helping bring that awareness to some people. And then I fill my bag of tools, my AI tools, so to speak, with that I can pull out to mitigate against that problem. And so there's a few different things, and one is like you said, you can ask it to like, okay, I want you to argue for and then argue against and have it, put that out. Another, sometimes I could just ask it, it's like, okay, how confident are you in this, answer or assessment? And, I need you to really back it up. And sometimes just like really saying, hey, look, this is critical. I need you to give me no holds barred advice. It needs to be, and just like being very clear that you want it to be forthright. That can help sometimes. When I have a really important decision, like maybe I'm deciding some strategy thing, or designing a prompt that I'm going to use in creating custom AIs for clients, and it needs to be accurate because I'm going to be doing it over and over again. And if there's something broken, then I've got a problem, right? One thing that I'll do is I'll actually use two different AIs like Claude and ChatGPT, and so I'll ask ChatGPT for some thoughts, and then I'll say, okay, great. And I'll take it and I'll go over to Claude and I'll say, so I've been talking to a friend about this idea, and here's what their take on it was. I'd love to get your thoughts on this. And it's like, yeah, that's not bad, but then you might want to also think about this too. And I'm like, okay, great. And I'll bring it over and like, I was talking to a friend about what you said, and they said, what about these things? And it was like, okay, yeah, those 2 points are good points. So, but I don't know about that one. And so in a way, I'm kind of like having them play
Yeah.
off of each other, and that has been useful. I don't, do that. It's a little time consuming, so I just do it when it really matters.
Mm.
But that is a technique that you can use, or even go to two or three of them and then kind of aggregate what they come back with. So, and then one final thing that I do is I'm asking it to assess things all the time. So, a simple example would be, don't just say write me a subject line. It would be write me 10 subject lines, and then assess each of those subject lines according to these three criteria, and so that I can choose the one that will work best for my goal. Or from a strategic standpoint, if I have it, say I've just dumped a bunch of ideas in and I said, give me some more ideas for growing my business or whatever, and then I'm looking at this list of ideas and I'm wanting to like really zero in on the right one, I might say like, okay, let's prioritize these by assessing them. And here are the criteria that are important to me. Look at each of these and rate it according to how easy or hard it is to implement. What is the confidence that it will actually lead to the kind of result that I'm looking for? What kind of cost is there in the near term and in the ongoing to execute or maintain this? Assess it according to risk, for instance. And it might change depending on what kind of thing you're assessing, but tell it what's important to you, the criteria, and say assess this, assess these ideas, and it does a really great job of that because it'll come back and go, okay, I would say that it's a 5 on the ease scale because da 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 da, and it's a 4 on the confidence scale because da 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 da. So that's one way to narrow things down or verify what it's giving you or verify what you've given it to in a responsible way, is to give it criteria and have it assess and prioritize.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. First of all, asking, I mean, I do this a lot. I ask it for different options. And I
Hmm.
usually go either 5 or 10, give me 5 or 10
Right.
options, and then rank it according to a set of criteria. And the beautiful thing about that is, as you described, it actually tells you, okay, I'm ranking this number one, here's why. And it explains how it, not just where it ranks against your criteria, but also why why it ranks there,
Hmm.
why it's assessed that there, which in my experience has given me some insights to say, okay, I've got those 5 options, but I'm going to fine tune those some more because I've learnt now
Hmm.
what are the elements. Let's say it's a title. What are the elements of that title that meet my criteria, and I
Yeah.
understand it a bit better now.
Yeah. And one thing for everyone to realize is, if they're like, oh, this sounds interesting, but I don't know what criteria to use. I don't know what context to give. I don't ask it. Say, okay, I would like to assess these. What criteria would you suggest we use to assess these? Or, the like ask me clarifying questions to make sure you have all the information you need to assess these. So, if you feel stuck as to what to say or uh, ask it and have it guide it in speaking to it. And I'll do that all the time, and that can be helpful if you're just, yeah, if you're still getting used to like how AI works and thinks. And it's really good at helping you to use it well. So don't hesitate to just ask.
Yeah. And as a learning tool, I mean, I did something yesterday, and this is in my hobby space. So I'm a keen photographer, and I have a bunch of different cameras and flashlights, and they're not necessarily compatible. Some of the flashlights are old, and I was never a big fan of flash photography, so I'm just kind of getting back into it again a little bit now. But the flashes whilst they were fully automatic for my film cameras that I still have,
Mhm.
they operate with my digital cameras, but I have to use them in manual mode. So it's actually quite
Right.
complex. And then the digital cameras have probably 10,000 different settings that I can never find the one I
Hmm.
need. And I
Yeah.
find myself carrying either in my camera bag, having the actual little instruction booklet. And then recently I thought, hang on, I can get the PDF file and put it on my phone and then I'll have it all the time.
Yeah.
But of course, going through the index and finding the appropriate thing to understand what do I need to do to set this up for this particular situation, I thought, I'm going to put all the manuals that I have for everything in PDF file
Awesome.
into a custom GPT, and then I'm
Yeah.
going to give it
Yeah.
a set of instructions. And I just started testing it yesterday, so the instructions probably still need to be fine tuned some more. But yesterday I said, "Hey," and this was testing something that's already happened. It was last Sunday. We had a family celebration, big group gathering in a restaurant where two walls were windows out into the bright daylight, and inside it was
Mm-hmm.
quite dark. So I said, I want to take group photos in this scene to make sure everything's evenly lit. How do I do that? And
Yeah.
it was just it. And I said, yeah, give me a step by step instructions to set it up. And not only did it say, okay, the first thing you need to do, here's how you set the exposure for the bright areas. Here's how you set your flashlight. It gave me a step-by-step instruction, which was pretty much what I had done on the Sunday, but it probably took me several hours to work that out.
Right.
But on top of that, it said the impact or the effect each step has. This will do
Mm.
this will do that, so that
Yeah.
if I decided, okay, I'm going to up the power of the flash or I'm going to reduce the power of the flash, I knew what the impact of that was and what it
Right.
might do to other things. And I thought, this is just absolutely crazy. And I thought that's a really good metaphor for what you could actually apply in business. You know, give it that disparate collection of information and then say,
Yeah.
okay, based on all this stuff, tell me how to do this.
Yeah. Because there's so many variables, right? Like life is complex, business is complex, and one of the things that yeah we do in business is identifying whether you realize this or not. It's like identifying and tweaking the variables. At least that's how I look at it as a former engineer, right? And AI is so good at identifying the variables and how they interact and which ones are most important for what you're trying to do. So yeah, that's an awesome example.
So, how do you see the role of AI shifting when we start to use it in that light, sort of as a collaborator? And I guess on top of that question, how do we still maintain that, if we're using it in business, how do we still maintain that human context and the human relationships when we're, for example, using it to write an email or using it to write blog posts or sales copy, whatever it might be?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, so there's a few different things that come to mind. In terms of yeah, especially when you're going to be maybe using it to write content and write emails, and it'd be so easy to slip into just like letting it do it for you wholesale, right? Um, and so I do think this is something that we're going to need to be aware of and just practice as a skill. Just like, social media, we all had to like learn skills and how to balance it well and how not to get sucked in and how to not, get led astray by something that's actually a hoax. And, like so that it's like there's skills to learn, right? But one of the ways to maintain that is to I mean, first of all, I mean, the context thing is important because as long as you are putting yourself into it, your ideas, what's important to you, your vision, like you are in there, and it's going to be a part of the output. Which is why I love this idea of helping my clients create these custom GPTs and other custom AIs that are already just fully familiar with their business and their mission and what they're and their voice and what they're trying to do. We talked about how important context is, and you can end up repeating a lot of the same things over and over and over again. But how nice is it if you have an AI who already knows that it's like, oh, you have ADHD and you work with coaches and all these things about me, and so it's always compensating for that. So that's one thing. It's just like, make sure that you are putting yourself into the input and you will still be there in the output as well. Something I'm thinking a lot about, and of course, we're going to have, I'm sure, more and more regulations depending on nations and states and things, is disclosure and disclaimers about, like, here is my AI policy. Like, if you get an email from me, here's how I use AI, so that it's not just an AI talking to you. Like, I'm be very clear about, here's how I use AI in my process, but here's why or where or how you're still getting my expertise and my thoughts and ideas, so that people know what to expect. And so I guess what I'm pointing at there is, putting yourself into it gives that authenticity, and then there should be a transparency as well. And I just had a friend today who sent out an email, and partway down at the bottom, it said, here's my AI policy. And I clicked it, and I thought it was so great. It was easy to read. It wasn't a bunch of legalese. It was just, here's how I use AI and what you can expect to be true about anything that I deliver to you as content, as emails. So I think that's going to be important as well. And and then the other thing that I do is, like, when I mean, in the end, like, I still want to interact with my clients, and I still want to impact people. I just want to be able to maximize how I do that. And so it's just that learning to be judicious about, where does AI serve me the best, and where do I, set different rules or constraints to make sure that it's my thinking that's still coming in. And I think as you get better at using AI, I've noticed that I do use a lot of intuition and curiosity in determining what that next prompt is going to be. And so, for a little while, I had some guilt about sending somebody an email if AI had helped me write it at all. And I was actually talking to AI about it. And it's like, well, what's your process like? And I talked about how, even if I'm writing a sales follow-up, I put all this information about, here's who the person is, and here's what our relationship is, and here's what I'd like to see for them, and here's what I think is, that they need, but here's their email of them talking about. So it's like, all that human element is still being fed in there. And so the AI is like, okay, so in the end, you've still carefully crafted a process for arriving at that email. You know, it's kind of like, we used to not have spell check and grammar
Yeah.
check, right? And now we do. And just because I use Grammarly to fix some of my grammar doesn't mean that it's not still me talking to the person. So I don't know. That was a little bit, maybe a little bit scattered, but those are, some of the ways that I think about, yeah, how do we use it responsibly and still keep that human element? And some of that we just have to figure out still as we go, and hopefully just be aware of it, and maybe make some missteps as we're going, but then
Yeah.
figure out how to dial that in.
Yeah, I think I love the idea of the AI policy. I might look into that some more, and AI can probably help you write one.
Yeah,
um,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah, totally, right? Yeah.
yeah. But so that transparency, I think, is really important. And one of the things that frustrates me a lot with some of these AI chatbots that you get on support sites, or if, like, the other day I went in somewhere and I had to cancel a purchase because they actually had the wrong image on what I'd ordered, and what I wanted to order was what was in the image, but what I ended up ordering was what was in the
Mm.
text, and I didn't, at the time, didn't pay attention to the disparity between the two. I only saw that when the order was confirmed. Now, this was a fairly good experience because the chatbot came up and said, "What do you want to do?" And one of the options was modify an order. And once I hit modify an order, it connected me to a person, and I could then have the
Hmm.
conversation. And I think and it was clear it was an AI bot up front. I think that's probably a reasonably good approach to using those AI bots. But the ones that frustrate me are the ones that, first of all, kind of pretend as if it's a real person.
Yeah.
Secondly, they say, "Did I answer your question?" And when you put no, it then gives you a series of other answers from their knowledge base. And then you say, "No, you still didn't answer the question." And then it just keeps going in that loop
Right.
rather than giving you the option, do you want to talk to a person, or saying, "Okay, I've exhausted my allocation of answers. I'll connect you to a person," or whatever it might be. So that
Mhm.
transparency and then that user experience part, I think, still has a way to go.
Yeah. Well, and one thing we need to realize, this is an important principle is, and I don't think if anyone's ever had that experience of you're talking to AI and the thread's getting longer and longer and longer and it starts to feel like it's lost track of what you're doing or things have shifted,
Yeah.
that's called drift. And the reason why that happens is because there's a certain, and I know you know this, Jurgen, but there's this context window is what it's called. It basically, think of it as like a working memory that it's working with, and it can only hold so much. Just like any of us, like if you've been doing a task for 8 hours, you might lose track of some of the things you were thinking about 5 hours ago, right? And this is a big issue. This is what everyone, like all of the major players, are trying to solve this of like, how can AI access exactly what is needed and keep track of what's going on without losing track of what's important, right? And so, in this case, the one that just kept shooting stuff out to you, part of how we need to solve that is you have to craft and store your information in a way that is friendly for the AI when given a certain input from a customer or from you trying to create something, to find the bits and pieces that are most relevant as fast as possible and serve that up in a way that's actually useful. And that's why, like, I spend like hours and hours developing systems right now for how do I break down my client's body of work into these very usable chunks and pieces, so that if they wanted to make a chat bot for their clients, so their clients, say, between their one-on-one coaching calls, could go into this chat bot and go, remind me what Jason said about messaging. And I know he said messaging hooks, and it could like, but oh yeah, here's Jason's framework about messaging hooks and how to grab attention. But it has to be organized right in order, otherwise that context window, it doesn't know what to fill that working memory with, and so it might just have a bunch of like garbage in there or just non-relevant stuff, and that's why we end up with like these really poor answers. So some of that is the skills we've been talking about and giving it the right information, having it ask you questions, and some of it is knowing, like, yeah, how to organize the information that you want it to work with. um, so yeah, that's an important thing for us to keep in mind.
Yeah, yeah, that's a really important point, and I find myself more and more now, if I know I'm going to do a long session, that there are a lot of iterations. I have a document open beside, and I will copy every response in there and every prompt I do. So
Hmm.
I'll actually have a
Yeah.
record of it, and when I see it starting to lose its way and go off track, I'll start a new conversation. But I'll have a record of what I've chatted, and then I use
Yeah.
that document together with um, the rest of the information that's in there, and just say, okay, I want to continue this conversation.
Mhm. Yeah, and
Mm.
one simple, I just did this today because I'm working on this very detailed process to arrive at a prompt that needs to do something very specific, very dependably, and so it's taking a while to get to it. Is every several prompt back and forth with is I'll say, okay, summarize, like, what are we doing here? What is the goal? Where are we at? What do we need to do next? What have we decided so far? And so by having it, kind of look back and re-summarize, it kind of brings the most important stuff up recently, because that's part of how it's deciding like what to hold in there, is just what some of the most recent stuff is. So sometimes just having it like sum up for you and really for itself at regular, like creating mileposts or checkpoints,
Okay. Yeah.
can help against some of that problem with drift.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a really good tip. Have to experiment with that one
Yeah,
some
give
more.
give give,
Yeah,
give it a try.
yeah, yeah,
Sometimes it works well, and you can still run into problems depending on the complexity of what you're trying to do. But
yeah.
I have found that it helps me at times.
Hmm. Well, looking further out into the horizon, Jason, what emerging trends in AI excite you, and for the potential that they have for businesses and creators to achieve something extraordinary?
Yeah. Well, obviously there's a lot of talk about agents, which, right now we've all had this experience at least a little bit with working with the chat bot, which is this just kind of very like in the moment you say something and it says something back. But, agent is like, tell it something to do. It doesn't need more instruction. It'll just go out and start doing it for you based on, what you've told it to. And so, that's going to be really interesting because imagine if so I work with a lot of different clients, and sometimes it can be difficult trying to keep track of like, okay, what have we talked about on our most recent calls, and what are the goals that they're working on, and what tools did I give them last, and what struggles did they share most recently, and when should I check back in with them again. And I think we all try to have some sort of system maybe to track this stuff, but imagine having an agent, and this is something I've started drawing out, but where let's say I have a group coaching call on Monday with my one program, and as soon as that's done, the transcript of that gets automatically processed by an agent that then breaks it down and like updates the client, each client's record with what they shared as their wins and what they shared as their struggles. It could, at any point, I could say, give me an update about so and so, and it could go in and say, here's what you talked about on your last call, here's what they committed to and are trying to stay accountable to, right now. Or if I say, okay, they said that, or even say like, hey, you after a call, maybe saying, hey, so and so mentioned they're struggling with designing their coaching offer. You might want to send them your, offer design worksheet tool. And so, would you like me to send that to them? And I could just go, yes. And so then write an email and like send it off to them. And so it'd be like, I mean, talk about having a real Jarvis, right? So, but again, yeah, this is going to be about having good organization of like databases and good organization of your knowledge, and then training them well. And but like the amount of time it can save you once you've really put something like that together is amazing. And imagine how much more like impact you can have, how much more high value, like you could have a really high value, high touch thing, offer an amazing experience without it just like totally overloading your energy and schedule as a coach. Because that's one of the biggest things we run up against, I think, as experts, coaches, consultants, is we have limited time and energy to serve the clients that we have, right? So that kind of thing really excites me, not necessarily, I mean, it's nothing wrong with this, not necessarily to just go and, sit on a beach and do nothing, though I don't mind doing that sometimes too, but also just so, yeah, I can have a bigger impact with the limited time and resources that I have. And so, yeah, I see all the things that I'm doing right now, even with these, simpler custom AIs, as setting the foundation so that if a client in a year is like, yeah, create the ultimate client juggler system for me, please. It's like we have all the information ready to just wrap it in a nice experience and then bam, put that into their website, their membership program or whatever. And that kind of thing sounds, I know it sounds really, really exciting to me. So that's the kind of thing that I have my eye on.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. And and I don't think we're that far away from that, are we?
No, we're really getting there. I mean, the truth is, like, even right now with, Zapier or Make.com, which, are these automation, and with, something like Notion or Airtable to like store tables of information, and the chat bots that we have now, like, absolutely, I think that's there. And the piece that will continue to develop is the ability for that to act independently, as
Yeah.
opposed to me having to like every morning give me an update about my clients. Okay, now send it. It'll be more proactive and
Mm.
and suggesting things, more proactive and managing me. I mean, I think a lot of us as entrepreneurs are like, I just want somebody to manage me so I can focus on the important things, right?
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
that's pretty exciting to think about.
Yeah. One of the apps I'm playing with at the moment is Well, I actually started using it as a journaling app, but I'm finding it's almost a personal assistant in the sense that it does
Mm.
a lot of the things that we've talked about in terms of the AI, primarily from input that I give it and from my random thoughts that I dump in there during the day, and then comes back at the end of the day. I do a reflection session, and it says, "Oh, I noticed you shared this idea during the day, and then we talked about this later on in the day, and I see a thread here." But it also it's actually much better than the Chat GPTs and Claudes and
Mm.
Geminis at actually challenging me. But I have put a prompt in there to
Oh,
say, hey,
good.
I want you, anytime I say something, I want you to actually give me a challenge frame as well. And it'll
Mm.
actually say, hey, yesterday you said you were going to work on X today. Did you do that? And how
Right.
far did you get it? Do you want to carry
Yeah.
any action to forward to tomorrow? So I think that's almost like a personal assistant, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think this time next year, that's at least that's my plan is to be able to sit down in the morning, do a check-in with my assistant AI, and it's like, here's what's on your schedule. Here are the five prospects you might want to follow up with today. Here's your blocked out schedule according to what you said your priorities are. Do you want to change anything? No, okay, great. And then it's like awesome. And I go about my day, and then at the end I can check in and it's like ask me a few questions like, okay, what are 2 or 3 wins from the day? Did you contact those 5 people? And I just like, and so then I can track that stuff over time, or have that extra layer of accountability, or yeah, have it just taking care of some of that thinking. I mean, managing me, taking care of some of that
Yeah, yeah,
logistical thinking. Like that would be amazing. And yeah, a year from now, that's how I want to be operating with my own personal Jarvis. I'll have to come up with a different name. I don't. Jarvis is
yeah,
already taken, but yeah.
yeah, yeah. Well, I call mine Kai, Kai,
Oh,
which
nice.
is
Okay.
balance. The came from the Japanese word for balance and rejuvenation. I thought
Oh,
that
that's
that
awesome.
was what it did for me.
Yeah, that's awesome. Oh, actually, I did name because I have a business strategy chat custom GPT, and I named that one Ada after Ada Lovelace, who was one of like the first programmer in like the 19th century.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So that's yeah, I named. So I guess I do have a name. Ada is
There
my
you go.
my assistant.
Excellent. Well, this is fabulous, Jason. We could go on talking AI and applications and some of the um, unique ways and where it's headed for ages, but I'm just aware of the time, and I think it's a good point now to move on to our buzz round. Now, it's changed a little bit since you were last on the show. There's only three
Okay.
questions this time, but
Okay.
and they're AI focused, and the idea is we want to uncover a key piece of knowledge or a value or an attitude that guides you. Just short, punchy answers, whatever comes to mind. There's nothing, no wrong
Okay.
answers here, and hopefully
Sounds good.
inspire the listener to do something awesome as a result today.
Love it. Let's do it.
So, first one's around innovation. What's the most innovative way you've seen AI used to strengthen the human relationships in a way that really impressed you?
To strengthen human relationships. So I I have found, and some people might have reservations about this, but I like being very vulnerable with my AI. I mean, look, we can worry about privacy and stuff, and I don't know, maybe I'm naive, but I'm like, it's a robot. It's not judging me. So like sometimes I'll like say, hey, here are things I'm really struggling with right now, or like, hey, this thing came up with my daughter, and I want to know how to like, what's the, you know, act as a parenting expert, and help me come up with some ways to talk to her about these things or support her in a way that she'll feel so that kind of thing I really really love. And as a bonus answer, we all often have these difficult emails to write, and maybe we have some charged feelings because somebody slighted us or something like that, and so I like going ahead and just writing the email that maybe I wish I could send, and then
Yeah.
I'll put it into AI and I'll tell it, use the principles of nonviolent communication, which is a book, and it's a
Mm.
brilliant communications book, and rewrite this email using nonviolent communication, and then it comes out with this beautiful thing that's like, okay, yeah, that's what I actually should say, and it won't inflame the situation. So those are two that have worked brilliantly for human relations for me.
Yeah, I love that. Well, I love both of them, but the second one reminds me of a funny story. And I got a parking fine recently, and it was an unfortunate circumstance. And I went on the council's website, and it said, "Here's the appeals process." And I thought, well, I think I've got a good case for appealing. So I wrote
Yeah.
an email to appeal, and the appeals process said, here's all the things that the criteria that would make a successful appeal, and here's what you've got to present. So first thing I did, I went into ChatGPT and I said, here's the appeals process for this fine I
Hmm.
got. Here's the criterion they're going to say. Here's the situation as it was. Can you write me the appeal letter, making
Yeah.
sure I hit all those points?
Mhm.
So I did that, and it was thought, yeah, that's pretty good. And so I sent the appeal off, and then I got a response that declined the appeal, and it was kind of a
Mm.
ridiculous response, and I was like angry, and I felt like
Agitated.
writing
Yeah.
this writing
Uh-huh.
this nasty email. So I wrote the nasty email, and
Yeah.
I said, no, let's put it back to ChatGPT, and I said, can you
Yeah.
reframe this one? And then it reframed it in a sort of professional way. Um, but
Yeah, that's great.
basically saying I was disappointed with the outcome. And then I thought, you know what, they're not going to, it's not going to go anywhere. So I didn't even bother to send that. But what occurred to me, I thought, hang on, if it can rewrite based on the information this email in a professional manner, what can it do in a fun way? And I said, I don't know if you know the Australian comedian Jim Jeffries.
Yeah,
He's
I love Jim
Yeah,
Jeffries. Uh-huh.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I said, can you write me a response in the style of Jim Jeffries? And I was in tears of laughter.
That's all. I'm
It
gonna have to try that.
was,
I love that.
yeah, it was so funny. And I thought that was worth the cost of the fine. It was
Nice.
just so funny.
That's great. Love it.
Yeah. All right, we got off the track a little bit there. What's the
That's right.
next question? What's the best thing you've done to integrate AI with the way that in a way that enhances human connection?
Oh, is that the one we just talked about, or is this different? Wait,
This
so
is the second question. Yeah. So, what's the best thing you've
okay, so
done? I guess. I mean, you gave us an example there with uh, a couple of examples that you actually did. So,
mhm.
suppose you've answered it in a way.
Yeah, I'm trying to think if there's anything else that that comes to mind. I mean, I and you have to be really careful about this, but it has access to all kinds of stuff about psychology and whatever. So, when I'm feeling really anxious about something, again, sometimes I'll just dump it in there and I'll say, okay, act as a counselor who understands cognitive behavioral therapy and see if you can help me pick this apart and maybe, shift my anxiety or my understanding of this thing. And of course, I don't want anybody to think that AI just can replace therapy if that's what you need, because I'm also in therapy and it's very helpful. But for mental health, when used well, you have to be careful. It's really been helpful for me just because it acts as a mirror to some of my own thoughts and helps me, find the themes and the patterns, and it can even call me out on things and be like, I'm
Yeah.
noticing that so there's another example that just in
I
terms
think,
of, like, I guess that's
yeah.
human relation with myself is
With
really what
yourself,
that one's
yeah. I
about.
think it comes back to what we were talking about earlier, getting it to ask you a lot of questions and then connecting the dots. And
Right.
that's I think one example of that. And yes, the caveat there is a yeah, if you need professional help, AIs are not
Yeah.
the way to go.
Used responsibly. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, totally.
yeah, yeah. All right. Finally, what's the number one thing anyone can do to differentiate themselves by this in this age of AI by leveraging it in a way that prioritizes that human connection? Or maybe asked another way, what are the core skills we should be looking to develop more as businesses in this age of AI? And particularly if you think to like your daughter, for example, as she kind of goes through her schooling, what are some of the core skills people as they're about to enter a career should be looking to develop?
Yeah. I think one of the first things that comes to mind is just a certain level of discernment about how we use it. And there are understandably, concerns that we have about, because, we've talked about how it can be very, just kind of tell you what you want to hear. And in certain times for certain people, that can really cause a lot of problems, whether it's, with their mental health or their business or whatever. And it's the same, like I said, with social media and using the internet. When these technologies are new, we have to study them well enough. I'm not saying you have to go and become an expert on AI, but understanding enough about how they work that you can have that level of discernment about, yeah, making sure that it doesn't, lead you down a path that, just going to waste your time or maybe even cause issues as well. So, it can sometimes fool us because it is so good at communicating like a human. And I've heard a lot of people say, man, I feel like ChatGPT has more empathy for me than a lot of people in my life, right?
Yeah.
And that's, that's just, we can't help but have that mental reaction to it. But, keeping in mind that it's like, look, this thing is basically like it's rolling dice to decide what the next word is that it's going to give you. It's like we have to keep that into perspective as well. But it's here to stay. It's going to grow. It's going to impact our lives. It's going to change the world for better and possibly for worse at times, right? And so it is one of those things that, as intimidating as it might feel, still dedicating some time to following your curiosity and playing around with it, or learning just enough by listening to podcasts and things like this, so you can have that level of discernment. So as you're learning the other skills and trying things out, you can, be careful not to have it just cause problems for you. So you can use it responsibly.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point, and I think your comparison to the internet in the early days and social media is probably very relevant, because I often say to people that this time reminds me so much of the early days of the internet, where I got so excited about all the possibilities, and I'm feeling
Hmm.
that same sense of excitement right now. But at the same time, of course, um, there are a lot of people that are doing things that are either intentionally or by accident not very ethical, or
Hmm.
um, not in the interests of their fellow humans. And so that's where we've got to be really aware that there are some dangers there.
Hmm. And
Mm.
I will also say, there are some stigmas about using AI. We like, oh, people are, that's cheating to use it for your school, or that's
Yeah.
cheating to use it in your business, or, oh, it's just making us dumber. And, this is all, a lot of this stuff is like out of context. It's, there's a lot of hype out of there. I mean, we got to realize too, it's like, look, like AI can really be a huge help for some people who, I mean, just take ADHD. Like there are certain things in life that are harder for people with ADHD, and it's in some ways like a disability that they're working against. And so a tool like AI can really provide a great opportunity and boost. And that's just one example. Like I'm sure we can think of a lot of other ones. And so, yes, we want to be careful, but also realize that, like, hey, with the stigmas, if we just like spread the stigmas and vilify
Yeah.
the technology, it's like, look, there are people who are going to use it very legitimately, and it's going to really help their lives. And so, we want to just continue to learn and be aware, and hopefully take it in a positive direction in the aggregate is what we can hope for.
Yeah, I liken it to. I mean, I remember going through school and learning a lot of things, and I've still, I'm a hoarder in by nature, so I've still got school books in shelves everywhere. And way back a long time ago, when I was at school, and I had all these big chemistry books, and I thought, I don't need to remember that. I've got the book there. I can look it up.
Yeah, yeah.
What I need to know is understand how to apply that, understand where it fits in context, understand how I can use that and why that's the case, and how I can use that in another context to sort of put two and two together and get five or six instead of just four. And in some ways, in those days, there was the occasional exam we had that was open book, and they had
Hmm.
some sort of stigma about it. So, well, they're easy exams, they're
Right,
not real
right.
tests. Well, no, it depends what what the exam questions were, but what they're probably actually testing were your understanding of the subject rather than your memorizing of the facts. And then when the internet came along, of course, you didn't need the big bookshelves and the books. You
Right,
had that
right.
sort of at your fingertips, and then on the phones. And now we don't even have to do the Google search. We've got AI to search it and filter it and pull up
Yeah,
something based on a certain term. So it's to me, it's really just an iteration of that same thing, but it depends, of course, how you use it then. So if for example, I mean, the classic examples that are used um, to stigmatize it are, well, kids are asked to write an essay about a topic, and then they just go
hmm,
into ChatGPT and say, write me an essay about this topic, and then they submit whatever ChatGPT comes up with. Well, that's clearly not in the interests of any of learning. But at the same time, if the exam is, well, find out everything you can about this topic, research it in depth, and then present a report about what you've learnt, ChatGPT or one of the AIs does an amazing job of pulling stuff together. And my contention is that you probably learn a lot more. I mean, we have conversations all the time where we see something and we say, oh, I wonder why that's the way it is. And in the
hmm.
past, 80% of those conversations would have ended there. 20% we might
Right.
have gone onto Google and done a little bit more research. Now, 95% of them, where I wonder, okay, straight into ChatGPT. Oh, okay, that's why. So we learned something new.
Right.
Hmm.
Yeah, you keep the when I've taught my daughter how to use ChatGPT, I'll always ask her at first, like, what is your objective here? What do you want to get out of this process? Is it to learn to, and sometimes she's like, I just want to get this done. It's stupid, it's busy work or whatever. I'm like, okay, fine, we can help you do that. And then, but I think the answer is very simple. It's like, stop grading the paper, the output, grade the process. It's like, fine, if they use ChatGPT, great, but have them show how they used ChatGPT and grade that process as opposed to whether or not, they sat there and typed out of their brain every
Yeah,
single word because they might have learned a lot even having used ChatGPT to write with. So anyway, there's a little bit of my soapbox about it.
excellent. All right. Well, this has been fabulous, Jason. Now, where can people find out more about you, about the work you do, and maybe even reach out and say thanks for what you shared today?
Yeah, absolutely. JasonVanOrden.com is my site, which I'm in the middle of redoing to reflect all of this AI work that I'm doing. I'm on LinkedIn a lot. That's where I typically post and connect with people. So feel free to connect with me over there. And if you're curious about getting started making one of these simple custom AIs for yourself, if you go to jasonvanorden.com/AI, that'll forward you right to a workshop that you can download, and it'll walk you through the basics of starting to make one yourself using ChatGPT. So yeah, if you're curious and just not sure where to get started, just jasonvanorden.com/AI, and that's free. Just enter your email and you'll be able to get going.
Okay, so that kind of answers the next question, I think, which is a specific action that our listeners can take. So go and have a look at
There it is.
the the little workshop that Jason's put together there. I'm sure it'll be great value. So thanks so much for sharing your time and your insights so generously today, Jason. I've really enjoyed our conversation. I've got a couple of tips that I need to make a note of and implement in my next sessions. And yeah, please do stay in touch.
Wonderful. Excellent. Well, thank you so much. You're going to really enjoy this. And yeah, look forward to connecting again in the future.